So, two last things. One, I want to connect Puerto Rico with just the sort of like global role of New York City. But so let me just say,
Do you have 2 hours?
Sorry? Yeah,
Do you have 2 hours?
I do. You're gonna come when you win this fucking thing. You're gonna come in studio, and we will.
I love it.
We'll outline the agenda. But
I love it.
no, I know you've done a lot of great work on Puerto Rico, and we've also, the last time you were on, we actually talked about Puerto Rico, and we talked about Nelson Dennis, I believe his name is,
Yeah.
a great journalist. War Against the Oral Puerto Ricans. That's a great book everybody should read. But specifically, there is this New York-Puerto Rico relationship, and it's another kind of classic example of a lot of politicians in the city are very, they know what time, they know what parade to show up to. They know how to kind of signify. Meanwhile, if they're taking money from some of the same Wall Street and hedge fund interests that are in the next stage of robbing this colony blind, just specifically, what's the role that you see for yourself and drawing light on that New York to Puerto Rico relationship?
It's a little wonky, and in terms of understanding how machines in New York City work. But essentially, you have a situation in New York where you have the bondholders who are holding the debt in Puerto Rico, and they're setting the terms. You have Promesa, which is there's this fiscal board that has been determining the austerity of the island. I mean, the island is under austerity, and not only is it under austerity, but meanwhile, it is twice as poor as Mississippi, which is our poorest state. It is, Puerto Rican citizens, I say Puerto Rican citizens or U.S. citizens, but they self-identify usually as Puerto Rican citizens. That's not me being, that's just, you go to the island, you'll get that right away. We are Puerto Ricans, and
Yep.
People say it's our country, so there's a strong independence movement there, or in the culture at least. But they will say, they're being taxed on goods coming in and goods going out. So I live in New York. I go to Puerto Rico, and the cost of a cup of coffee is the same. And we have different reasons. Our cup of coffee is expensive because the rent is too damn high. And so, 75% of your coffee is going to the small business's rent. There, it's going to these ridiculous taxes that have been put on the island. And then there's extreme austerity, and then they're slicing and dicing up the island and selling it to private, billionaires, and privatizing school systems and the power grid and the water system. I mean, everything is being privatized on the island. And it all really does tie back to two places, Boston and New York City, in terms of Wall Street. But to add in another layer, the politicians in Puerto Rico are very connected with the politicians here in New York City. There are a few politicians in New York of Puerto Rican descent who are, work directly with some consultants who also represent the bondholders, and there's a very significant relationship. It also ties into the DNC. I don't think that Tom Perez would be, full circle here. He would be chair if it weren't for the Puerto Rican delegation, which undemocratically, and there's a big, hullabaloo right now about this in the DNC. The DNC members from Puerto Rico that existed before were ousted in a coup by these corporate DNC members who ended up getting Tom Perez the final vote. And so, statehood is actually a conservative issue. And so suddenly statehood was an official DNC position when it never was. It was never voted on, and was being pushed by these DNC members, many of whom are consultants who are partnered with Republicans and who represent Republicans. So, it's a tremendous tragedy. It's outrageous. It's disgusting. The governor of Puerto Rico is very close with an assemblyman here in New York who represents the Puerto Rican Day Parade. He's the chair of it. There's a lot of financial shenanigans that go on there. It's the largest ethnic parade in the city. It's a big, big, big moneymaker. And then they have weekend conferences. And one of the things I proposed, there's this very famous conference called Somos. And it happens in Puerto Rico and in Albany twice a year, one in each place. And this year, when they had it, all the public advocate candidates went down there, and they partied up. And I as somebody who spent, much of my last year in Puerto Rico, it's not like I needed a trip to Puerto Rico. I boycotted it, and I sent out a press release saying that, if I'm elected public advocate within 4 months, I would like to have another conference in Puerto Rico where we invite lawmakers and we talk about disaster capitalism, and we bring union leaders and organizers and activists, because the one that exists now is a moneymaker, and some of the worst people in the world sponsor that conference.
Perfect. Disgusting, but perfect response. Okay, so just staying on the global just for one more second before we get to the tax answer, and then we'll let you go. But on top of that, and obviously this would be a really small part of the job, but there is an element where New York just also has this global role because it's connected everywhere, and there's specific relationship to a place like Puerto Rico, but there's also just the platform and the reach. And, as you know, on this show, we're very concerned about and following what's happening in Brazil, among other places, but particularly Brazil, with both sort of seeing into the horizon of what the threat and catastrophe of what Bolsonaro and the fascism that he represents, supported by U.S. foreign policy, supported by the Wall Street Journal, supported by our corporate sector, and also the fact that, that a really important progressive leader who brought tens of millions out of poverty is in prison and was a president for 2 terms, is in prison on, charges that everybody with any sort of objectivity around the issue thinks are incredibly questionable, or, in my case, I would say ridiculous, is a political prisoner. Obviously, I'm talking about President Lula. So to the extent that you also have a megaphone to talk about whether it be, Yemen or what might happen in the Eurozone, but in this case, obviously Brazil, could you touch on that as well?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned this, and it's not. I guess it's direct. It's more of a pattern relationship. We had an event at the beginning of December with the former finance minister to Greece, Yanis Varoufakis.
Yep.
It was interesting because I know him. I know him through maybe for the past year and a half or so. And I was in Greece this summer, and we had a long conversation about what he's doing abroad. He has this party in Greece called the Meta Party, and he has the DM25 movement. And what the DM25 does in the EU is the goal is to have 25 members of parliament elected to the EU Parliament that are progressive, but it's really there to fight fascism, because we see this trend happening worldwide. And, he recognized it early. I think, he'd been in contact with Bernie before, but I had, helped him rebuild that relationship. And he was at the Sanders Institute right before our event. And I was at the Sanders Institute, and there was a panel in discussion about the global rise of fascism. And I think, in a city like New York, which is just coming full circle, Yanis came to the event, and we talked about how New York could help fight fascism. Yep. And this was only a couple of weeks after you had the Proud Boys on the Upper East Side. It's the same way we treat it was very, the NYPD are actually involved in this, but how we have fascists literally on the streets, and we're just turning the other way in New York City, of all cities. So the conversation was, how do big cities unify in fighting fascism? Whether it's the way, I almost look at it from a perspective of, remember when the NYPD, they started, they're the largest counterterrorism squad in the world, right, but they also have locations and partnerships with police forces all over the world. And that's for quote unquote terrorism, like the watch of terrorism. I think there should be some sort of global system like that for fascism, because fascism to me is terrorism. It may never be classified the same way, at least in the next few years, but I think that we need to have some sort of global infrastructure in terms of how to identify fascism, the rise of fascism in places. How do I identify, sleeper cells of Proud Boys and white supremacists, and how do you counter it effectively? Because, you're on the internet, you get this very well. I used to work at the Young Turks. Something crazy would happen when we'd watch our videos is it would suddenly go into these children's shows, and you're watching, because TYT had a younger audience. So you'd be watching like 3 or 4 videos, and the next suggested video would be like a teenage show, and then the teenage show would go into another young show, and then suddenly you're watching like young white supremacist shows,
Right.
and it's propaganda, and they, and then it loops to Alex Jones or others,
Right.
and they're using, they're doing all they can to, especially with young white men, the same way that actual, ISIS did, and it's not very different. I mean, this is the same strategy for years. This isn't a new concept. But I'm going off on a tangent. Bottom line is, I think that the New York City government, given its strength and its capacity and being a media hub here, we should be much more proactive in countering this early on. But respecting free speech, of course, because I'm very committed to that. But understanding, the same ammunition that we do against what the government thinks is terrorism, I think we should be a little bit more aware of the rise of fascist activities.
Absolutely. So tax the oligarchs, tax the corporations. Is that the answer to this?
Oh, yeah.
And also come see us on Thursday.
Come see us on Thursday. Tax the oligarchs, tax the corporations. Yes. Real estate developers, they have used every loophole. They've been deregulated for 35 years. I think we have a great opportunity now that the Senate is Democratic in New York. We need to keep the pressure on Democrats who may not vote progressive on every issue to make sure that the real estate industry is regulated so that we can do more here in the city, because the state controls so much, but now that we have Democrats, we should be in partnership with them. And then, one more thing that we're fighting for is we're fighting for a $30 minimum wage in New York.
Yep.
Municipal employees should definitely have a $30 minimum wage, and companies with over 75 employees should definitely be paying $30 an hour. I understand small businesses are concerned because the rent is very high. So, figuring out something that works for small business owners that's functional, totally understandable. But, this is, the city's empty. The lights are off in the city. People don't live in these apartments anymore. It's Russian oligarchs and Chinese oligarchs and you name an oligarch, and they're using our apartments as Cayman Islands. And when you know that the New York rich people are pissed off because their real estate's going up because of the oligarchs, you have a problem.
100%. Nomiki Konst, we will see you on Thursday. Also, just real quick, what's the website in case people, for whatever reason, can't make Thursday, but they want to just donate online?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, help us any way you can before the 11th. We are very, very close to hitting our matching funds. And then, we have another week if we don't hit it. But it's really, really important because this money will equal the playing field. So nomikikonst.com, there's a little donate button in the upper right-hand corner. You can follow me on Twitter, same, Nomiki Konst, and there's a button in my bio. And yeah, I mean, this is a big race. There are a lot of candidates. If you're wondering who to vote for, one thing I'll say that separates me from the pack, like I said, there's a lot of electeds who are progressive on many issues, but they still take the money from the bad guys. And if you really want to stand up to them, and if you really want to stand up to inequality in the city, you have to be willing to fight the people who are buying off our politicians.
100%. Nomiki, see you Thursday. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Michael. See you Thursday. See everybody else on Thursday.
See everybody on Thursday.
Very appreciative.
Bye-bye. You just enjoyed that Michael Brooks Show video, and you can get a lot more by subscribing to us here at the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. It's literally right there.